Hey everyone. I have had a couple of requests to just go through my process for putting together Photoshop collages for your perspectives. Um, so I thought I would just kind of go through and rebuild one that I've already done. It'll save me a little bit of time, and hopefully it'll just show you a couple of new tools in Photoshop. I will say that my Photoshop process is like pretty kind of fast and loose. These usually take me, I would say, an hour or less to do. And it's not necessarily like the most flexible process, just because I tend to, when I'm working on these quick collages, do a lot of destructive edits. Yeah, it's more of kind of just like pretending I'm using MS Paint, but like a little bit more sophisticated. So yeah, I would just kind of like take them with a grain of salt, but this is just kind of how I do it if I'm putting together something pretty quick. So yeah, like I mentioned, this is something that I have made already, so I've got all of my files already. And the images that I'll be using, I've just saved in a folder here. You'll notice I have a couple of similar photographs, so I knew that I wanted this composition with a road in the foreground, some trees in the midground, and then kind of like mountains or a sky in the background. I was pretty easy and flexible, and I just grabbed a couple of each type of photograph so I can see what looks like it's going to work together. And then this composition is working on conveying a boundary in the woods, and so I've got these kind of like various metal objects that might be turned into kind of boundary markers. This was probably the hardest thing to find, was just something that would look appropriate in this composition. And so what I ended up using was this Richard Serra sculpture. So yeah, you can either load files into Stack, which would bring them all into this file, or you can open them all separately. I'm actually going to load them into a Stack for this. So that's under scripts and then load files into Stack. Okay, here we go. Yeah, I don't use that very often. I tend to open stuff, so I forgot that it opens a new file for you, but that's fine. We can go into image and then canvas size and just resize to whatever dimensions you want. Okay, so now that we have all of our images stacked into this file and we have it the dimensions that we want, I'm going to put in a background, and I'm just going to use the paint bucket tool, and this scene is going to be at night, so I'm just going to give it a black background, so when we work with opacities, everything is going to be kind of fading to a bit of a darker tone. So next I'm going to just decide which images I want to work with first, and I think I'm going to work with the kind of midground and background first. So I'm going to turn off anything that I don't want to look at right now. Okay, so now I've got these various kind of images. I've got a couple of forests here, quite a few of them, and then I've got this sky background. So maybe I'll just kind of like shove these off to the side, and I'll just make the sky the appropriate size. So now for this, these forest images, you know I want something that's like fairly wide so it can fill the frame. I needed a lake in the foreground so that it's showing the edge of the trees. That'll be easier to blend into the road foreground that I have decided to use. So just based on looking at these photos, I think this one's going to be kind of the most appropriate compositionally, and I might actually use this one as a secondary image. So yeah, I'm just going to turn the others off. And then I'm going to use the Marquee Select tool up here, and I'm going to just get rid of this lake here. I will leave a little bit at the bottom so we can kind of feather it out. And now the eraser, and just making sure that we have the soft round brush used. I'm going to start with 100% opacity just to get rid of this hard edge at the bottom. And then I'm going to lower the opacity and just kind of feathering out. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I think I'm going to add the road in the foreground now so that we can start blending them together. Okay, so now I've got the road sitting below the pines, and the pines are at like a 50-60% opacity. So I can start deleting this pine tree image wherever I want the road image to pop through. So we basically just want to blend the two images together and make it look like the road image is kind of coming, in front. So wherever I see these bushes that would sit in front of the pine trees, I'm just going to delete the pines. So now I'm going to bring in that other pine image that I had looked at before. I'm going to, actually I was going to flip it, maybe I'll just keep it the same. And I'm just going to see like how it'll fit in the middle here. I might put it in the midground as just one extra layer. And so again, after I've gone through and used the opacity eraser at 100%, I'm going to lower the opacity and start blending out the tops of these trees. And don't worry if you kind of like make the tops of the trees a little bit transparent, that's okay. And now I'm going to do the sky. So in the pines, I'm going to just start grabbing chunks of sky. Probably what I want to do is use the magic wand tool, just grab anything that I can that's up here, that's not trees. Okay, so I just used the regular lasso tool. That tool is easier to use if you have like a tablet or a touch screen. I just did it with my mouse this time, which, I mean, you don't have to be super accurate when you're blending everything together at the end. So we're just going to delete all of that sky. And then again, we're going to go in with the eraser tool at like a 50% opacity. I'm going to make it really big, and we're just going to start like blending out this mountain. Yeah, that's cool. And then the last thing I need to do is just get rid of this lingering bit of the road image. So just delete that. Okay, so I think I'm going to start playing with the levels now. We're going to get this looking a little bit more how I want it, and then I'm going to put in those kind of the metal pieces to show the boundary. So what I usually do for those is I use adjustment layers. These are nice because they're fully editable after the fact, and you can arrange them based on where you want them to be editing layers. So the first thing that I'm going to do is a levels adjustment layer, and you can see that it's situated in the layers stack where I put it. So I can move it up and down, like if I didn't want it to affect the pines, I could move it down so that it's just affecting the road. And so you can kind of play with all of the different adjustment layers to see what they do. This one, I usually use these sliders here, which is just showing how much of your image is dark versus light. And so I'm going to basically make more blacks in my image, which is here. the midtones I'm going to adjust to make them a little bit darker. So that's looking pretty good. The next thing that I'm going to do is put in a gradient map. So this maps your photograph based on the tone. So in this case right now, everything that is dark is this kind of pink color, and everything that's light is the pink color, and everything that's dark is the white color. So it's almost showing as like a negative right now, but you can change these just by double clicking on them, and you can change the color to whatever you want. So I think for the darks, I'm going to keep them nice and dark. So we're going to change that to black. And then for the lights, I'm going to try something in, maybe we'll do it in like a blue color, because I know that'll contrast with the rust that I'm going to be putting in. Yeah, sure. And I like using these because I find like when I'm trying to make something look 100% realistic, it doesn't always look the best when I'm doing a really quick collage. And so if you try to make things look a little bit more fantastical, sometimes the image and the composition can actually work out a little bit better. All right, now let's see this Sarah sculpture. Ooh, that's fun. I will move it to the top of my stack, and I'm going to stick it above the gradient and levels mapping. So now I know that they are not being affected by them. Oh, something else for these that I should show you. If you want any of these to affect just one of your images, if you hover over the boundary between them and hold Alt, it will show you how to put a mask on. So if you click there, now the levels are only affecting this sort of mid-ground pine, and then same thing to disconnect. So instead of affecting everything that's sitting below them in the layer stack, it will only affect the one layer that is directly below them. And you can do that with multiple at a time. So now this gradient map and the levels are only showing on this one layer. Okay, so for the Sarah image, I'm just going to use the polygonal tool. And once I have that selected, if you have any selection tool on, just right click and go select inverse, and then I'm going to delete the background. So there's a couple things that I want to do to this. First, I want to change the size and shape. Yeah, that looks good. And then the other thing that I'm going to do to it is I'm going to change the color balance on it. I do kind of want it like more of a rusty tone. So again, this is showing how this color balance is affecting the whole image that's sitting below it. I just wanted to affect this layer called Sarah, so I'm going to hold Alt and click on the area between the two layers, and then it will only be applied to this layer. Okay, those are looking pretty good, and I'm going to group all of those layers. Oops, I accidentally grouped the color balance. So we're going to apply the color balance to the whole group. And so now the color balance is affecting these 4 layers, but nothing else. Okay, so now we're going to, again, take our eraser, and I'm going to lower the size of it. We want the opacity to be 100%, and I'm just going to blend out the bottoms of these so they look like they're sunk in the earth. All right, so lastly, there was, in this photograph, there was one animal that represented each one. So for this one, there's a boundary or a territory. And so we had decided on a Wolverine as kind of like a guardian of the space. So I'm going to open this guy in a new image, and I'm going to use a different selection tool. So I'm going to select a subject. There's a few of these, and they're really helpful if you have especially like a stock image or something that's nice and clear. You can select whatever's in focus, the subject of the image, or a color range. The color range is nice if you have like an image with a completely white background and you want to make it a PNG. You just select everything that's white in the image and then you can delete it. So for this I'm going to select the subject and we'll see kind of how well that goes. Yeah, so that's like really nice and accurate. I'm going to just clean it up here a little bit. Okay, and that's looking good. So I am going to just use the brush tool. Yeah, actually I will use this watercolor brush, and I'm just going to kind of give it like a bit of a wash over texture. Okay, so now I'm just going to copy that and paste it in here. And that is pretty much it. So again, probably the most useful tools that I use are just the eraser brush, and I play with opacity and then the actual brush setting. I use soft round pretty much always. And then the adjustment layers. There are a bunch in here that are super useful. I pretty much always have on levels to change how dark and how light my image is. I use color balance quite often to change kind of the color tones of different layers or the whole image at once. And then I use gradient mapping a lot, either to overlay one single tone or even just to make things grayscale. I very often just use a gradient map instead of like a saturation. It gives you a bit better control over the tone. So yeah, that's it. I hope that helps.